put our flux on there. We get this high dollar silver alloy, more silver than make it. So here we are. Basically, we took the top off the canning jar, and we took this where we can silver brass and copper together, or metal and copper together with that, a little flux, clean it, and we were able to get a seal on there. Now what we're going to do is put some water in there, hook it up to the vacuum pump, and we're going to literally watch the water boil off at ambient temperature, as if it was being heated. So here we go. Okay, the jar represents a compressor. A compressor has two copper pipes running out of it. One is usually bigger than the other, and the bigger one is usually the suction, which is a negative pressure. It pulls in, and then the other one discharges, which is the high side. Okay, now, so what only thing that separates the high from the low inside the compressor is valves. In a semi-hermetic, if you put it in a pump down and it goes off on low pressure, say 5 pounds of pressure, because you never want your low pressure to cut off in a negative pressure. So you're having your walk-in cooler, the solenoid goes off, it goes into pump down, and it goes off at 5 pounds of pressure, but then the compressor comes on and goes off and comes back on, and it keeps short cycling. Well, what happens is that on the semi-hermetics there is valves on the top of the head. What you're going to do is if it's going in the pump down, going off of 5 pounds and rising before it should, and then going off, it's leaking by, the valve's leaking by inside the compressor. Semi-hermetics can be replaced and repaired. Cans, pretty much you got to replace the compressor. Now say you walk up to a condenser and the compressor, you put your gauges on, you don't see anything wrong with it, you turn it on, it starts running, high side goes up, but then also your suction also rises. Well, it's leaking off, it's off, and so basically it'll get hot and then go off on thermal overload. But on semi-hermetics, you can actually open the top of the compressor, you can actually put it in a pump down, go in with both service valves, well, cut the power of course, go in with both service valves, put on your reclaimer, take what's out of inside the compressor, replace the take off the top of the head, and replace your valves, and put your gasket and your head back on, put the vacuum pump on it, then open it back up, both service ports, and check your charge and make sure that you're doing well. But so that's the only thing that separates the two pipes that are hooked to the compressor, is there's the valves, okay, which what happens is when it sucks in, it closes so that the gas doesn't backflow back into the low side, which it will if they're bad valves. So now we've went over what a compressor is. It's a contained unit, which is the atmospheric is what is inside the compressor. This represents a compressor, and I want to show you what happens when we hook a vacuum pump on it and we start to remove the air from our atmospheric in there, which the atmospheric is the surrounding inside of the jar, okay? Not out here now. Now it's inside the jar. We got to start thinking outside the box here. And, okay, now that's an atmosphere that is controlled. I have a Schrader valve on it. I have my gauges hooked up. I'm going to turn on my vacuum pump. Okay, so immediately we see my gauge on the low side is going into a negative pressure. It was 0. Atmospheric was at 0. The balloon is growing. The balloon isn't really growing. What's happening is, like, say your head was in outer space. If there's not an equal pressure pushing in as pushing out, your head would either collapse or expand like this balloon is, okay? So now we notice the balloon is getting bigger. Our seal isn't the greatest up here, okay? So it may take a minute to actually pull the vacuum. But as you can see, the balloon's getting bigger and bigger, okay? So there we go. Okay, and now the balloon is going smaller because we shut it off. Okay, this ain't 100% sealed on here. It could if I put sealer on it. I got a bigger balloon here. Let's see what happens with the bigger balloon. Will it expand to the size of the jar? And there we go. Immediately the balloon starts to grow. Oh, and it popped and broke. controlled environment, we can actually take all the pressure out of there. And that's what we're doing when we're boiling off non-condensables. We are basically just dropping the atmospheric pressure to the point where the water boils off, or a non-condensables, not necessarily water, and evaporates. And that's what we're doing inside of a compressor when we put our vacuum pump on it and we're cleaning it out. That's why it's so important to get all the non-condensables out of there before you put the charge in. So it's important to get all these moistures and crap out. See it boiling? We'll get some Teflon tape, and we'll put a better seal around that.
Yeah.
Because we have to pull such a deep vacuum and to get this water to boil, I'm going to put a seal around there with some Teflon tape so that the jar lid seals on there. And I'm going to hook up on the water, and we'll see if we can't boil water at room temperature when we drop the atmospheric pressure. At ambient temperature, which is today's outdoor temperature. And there you go. We're actually boiling water at ambient temperature. We're pulling the moisture out of the system. Now I don't want to pump too much of that into my pump, okay? But you can see it's boiling.
Is it hot now?
No, no, you're not raising the temperature. It's at room temperature.
Oh.
I mean, at ambient temperature. You're not actually adding heat. Comes to a full boil. Nothing hot about it. It's evaporating into a gas. Okay. And it came to 0, which is at regular level pressure, and actually make the jar dry and pump all the moisture out of there. So now we're going to find out. Okay, I'm just going to fix the seal on this a little better. Now you see there's still water in there, okay, and it's still wet. Look, see, water's coming out still has moisture and water in it. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the lid back on it now that we removed some of the water. And now this is our compressor, and it has non-condensables in it. It's running high head and high pressure, so we want to get some of these you know, it had a leak and it got all this moisture into the unit, and we want, after we get the moisture out, we want to change the filter dryer. So now we're going to see if we can't get the moisture out of the system. Okay? Now we're going to watch how long we have this on. And if you look at all the beads of water around the jar, we're going to see them evaporate and disappear. And we're going to actually remove the moisture and water from the jar. And you can even see the little bit of water that's on the bottom is actually boiling. And what's going to happen is it's just going to dissipate. It's going to go away. It's going to evaporate, and the jar is going to become dry on the inside. And that's our goal with our compressor. We want to get it a good vacuum on it, because we're actually moving moisture and non-condensables out of the unit, which is very, very important. And we could also add a filter dryer onto this, on the suction or on the discharge, to help us clean it up some and get the moisture out of it. And we could also, but you got to know the direction, the flow of the refrigerant, because you can put the filter dryers on backwards. I've seen that many times. And we're watching all the water dry up off the sides and drying up off the bottom, and the jar's becoming dry. So we're actually going to leave this pump on until it's dry on the inside of the jar. And basically down here at the back of the pump, that's where the moisture comes out. It goes through this hole, through the gauges, reads what vacuum we have, and then it comes out of here, okay? And all the moisture goes into the atmosphere. So that's why it's important not to have any refrigerant in there when you're doing this, because you don't want to pump dangerous chemicals into the ozone. So you have to achieve a good vacuum with your reclaimer, and then insert your then put your nitrogen, fix your leak, and then put the vacuum pump on. And you want to make sure that you get a nice good vacuum to dry it out, clean it out of the non-condensables. So there you have it. Learning what a vacuum pump does to the system and how important it is to get a good vacuum and to have your filter dryers replaced when you do the compressor, or when there's a leak in the system. And because you think about it, when the refrigerant leaks out, non-condensables leak in. You know, they get into the system. So it's good to once you go to fix the leak, that you go ahead and do it all properly and get it nice good vacuum, get the right filter dryer in the right direction. All these things are important to ensure the life of your unit. As you can see, it's nice and dry on the inside. All the rain, all the water beads gone, and on the bottom of the jar there's very little in the bottom, and it's still boiling off. And eventually there isn't going to be any water. It's going to be absolutely dry in there. Okay? And we achieved it by using the vacuum pump.